Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to Grants Preparing for the Proposal. I am Lauren McCawley, and I'm here with my colleagues, co-presenter Logan Dreher and moderator Laura Ting. We are all members of the Office of Grants Administration, or OGA, at the California Department of Food and Agriculture, or CDFA. Laura, do you want to go ahead and share your screen, please? Perfect. So first, a quick disclaimer that while we all work for CDFA and we are presenting today in good faith based on our experiences, the thoughts and opinions expressed today are our own and do not necessarily represent the views or policies of the California Department of Food and Agriculture or the Office of Grants Administration or any of our federal partners. So I'd like to take a moment to introduce ourselves. As I mentioned, my name is Lauren McCawley. I have been with CDFA and the Office of Grants Administration for about 3.5 years now. First as an analyst with the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program, and more recently as the program manager for a new U.S. Department of Agriculture funded grant program called the Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Program, or RFSI. Before joining CDFA, I helped apply for grants at 4 different nonprofits that I worked at over the years.
Good morning. My name is Logan Dreher. I also work with CDFA at the Office of Grants Administration. I've been there for a little over 2 years now, and I provide one-on-one application assistance to first-time applicants to the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program, and I also work on a number of other state-funded grants. Before CDFA, I worked at a nonprofit doing capacity building work for other small nonprofits.
Finally, we have Laura Ting here with us today. They are a grant analyst with the Office of Grants Administration, and they will be moderating the chat and assisting with any technical issues that we may have. So a little bit about this workshop. This workshop is designed to help producers and processors who are new to grant applications. There are many steps to take prior to beginning the application process, such as registering with the System for Award Management, creating a mission statement, defining your goals and needs, finding programs that are the right fit, and more. So our hope for this workshop is to, one, provide an overview of everything the small producer should do before beginning their proposal in order to maximize success. Two, outline the differences between private, state, and federal grants. And three, provide resources for applicants searching for the right grant for their business or organization. Finally, provide a few basic tips and tricks for writing a proposal. The structure today, we will spend about 40 minutes presenting, and we left about a half hour for Q&A at the end. Please do feel free to put your questions into the questions and answer box as we go along, but we will answer them at the end of the presentation.
Great. Laura, could you go to the next one after that? Perfect. So we'd like to start by defining some of the terms that you'll hear often today. The first is funding source. This is where the money comes from. Grants are often federal funding, state, or private funding. The next is pass-through funding. This is funding that comes from one source but is awarded, distributed, and administered by a different source. So for example, many federal pass-through programs are administered by the state or county governments. Some state pass-through grants are administered by county or city governments. And then finally, request for applications, RFA, or request for proposals, RFP. This is an invitation to apply for a grant. These documents usually contain details about the grant, eligibility, available application assistance, how to apply, and more. Next slide. So funding can come from several sources, such as the federal or state government, local governments like cities or counties, and from non-governmental sources or private sources, like nonprofits, philanthropies, or charitable foundations. As far as government funding is concerned, federal funding is usually considered to be the strictest. There are several laws and codes governing federal grants, all contained in Part 200 of the Code of Federal Regulations. These uniform administrative requirements, because they're code, must be considered in all federal grants. State funding may have fewer requirements, and local funding may have even fewer. However, federal funding is often, but not always, the largest awards, and local funding the smallest. So there's a bit of a balancing act there. And then private funding can have very variable application and management requirements, and each privately funded grant will be different. Today's presentation will focus more on state and federal grants as they're the most consistent, but the lessons in the presentation will also help you when applying for private funding. Next slide. Generally, a successful grant application begins with a need and then is met with a grant. That means that the applicant has a pre-existing need or want for their organization, and they find a grant to supply that need. So the best first step is to think about your organization before you think about grants. First, consider the goals of your organization. There are lots of ways to do this, such as through a 2 or 5 year plan, creating a business plan, or something similar. Remember to use SMART goals. These are goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So for example, our organization will have sufficient capacity to hire 2 additional full-time processing staff by the end of 2026 is a SMART goal for a processing facility. It's also a good idea to create a mission statement. There are 2 examples of mission statements from the Food Literacy Center and Three Sisters Garden on the slide. You'll have access to these slides to review the mission statements in more detail later. But keep in mind, a mission statement is a short description of what your organization currently does and what it plans to achieve. A mission statement may also include your organization's values, the characteristics and processes that you think are important, and your vision, the future that you want to create. Doing these 2 things first is helpful because it helps you get your whole organization on board. If everyone agrees with your goals and mission, everyone will be aligned and ready to work together on grant proposals. Also, many grants will ask you to describe your organization, and your mission statement is a great help with this.
Most grants will require you to know your tax identification number, legal business name, and business mailing address. If you apply under these names and with this information initially, you will save yourself time and difficulty later. It is important to know what these are exactly. If you file taxes as an individual or an LLC, that is usually your business name. Now, you may have another name that you typically do business as, otherwise known as a DBA. However, if you do not pay taxes under this name for grant purposes, this is not your legal business name. However, again, most grants will allow you to include your DBA when applying. So if I had a business, I might apply as Lauren McCawley, LLC, doing business as Lauren's Lemons. Next slide. Oh. Okay. The System for Award Management, or SAM.gov, is a federal website. Generally, federal grants require you to be registered with SAM.gov to receive funding. This is also true for pass-through grants. You will want to use your legal business name, business mailing address, etc., when registering to avoid having to re-register later under your legal name. The first step in registering for SAM.gov is to get a Unique Entity Identifier, or UEI. SAM.gov has made videos that walk you through this process. Again, we will be emailing out the slides in the post-presentation email, so you'll have access to all of these links at your convenience. Some federal grants only require this first step, that is getting your UEI. This is especially true for pass-through grants. For example, my program is funded by USDA, but administered by CDFA, and we only require sub-recipients to have their UEI. Other programs require you to validate your entity, and here is a walkthrough video for that process. And then finally, we have a link here that explains the whole process and includes a frequently asked questions section. If you click that link, please note that this link will download a PDF to your computer. While registration with sam.gov is typically only required for federal grants, the process is free. If you think you may apply for a federal grant or a federal pass-through grant, it would be a good idea to have your validated UEI ready ahead of time, as this process can be time-consuming. Next slide.
Okay, so now you're ready to apply for a grant. Where should you start looking? Here are some great resources to find grants related to agriculture. Next slide. And here are some links for finding private funding. There are many resources to search for private funding, including individual sources' websites. And again, we'll share the slides afterwards so you can click through all of the links. Once you've started looking for grants, you may feel overwhelmed. How do you narrow down and decide which grants are worth the work of an application? This is where you want to use your mission and goals to guide your search. The grant should fit your organization, not the other way around. So, for example, if your goal is to purchase land or equipment, look for grants that fund capital investments or improvements. If your goal is to increase staff or programming capacity, look for grants that fund personnel. Multi-year grants will allow you to hire staff on longer-term contracts. If your goal is to get organic certified or other training, look for technical assistance grants like the CCOF Organic Transition Grant. And finally, if your goal is to get help with a hardship or emergency assistance, look for relief grants such as the California Underserved and Small Producer Drought Relief Grant Program.
Sorry, I was answering a question in the Q&A. All right, before you apply for grants, you should consider the true cost of the grant. Here are some points to consider. These points will be different for each organization and for each grant, but these are just some common concerns to think about. The first is administrative costs. Think about staff time for applying for, refining, and managing the grant. This includes time spent researching and filling out the application, working with the grant's administrators to make any adjustments necessary to your proposal, tracking and reporting on project progress, invoicing and managing funds, etc. Also consider the time your organization will be held up in the grant. If you won't receive funds for 6 months or a year after applying, can your organization afford to wait for the grant funding, or would it be better to make those purchases independently now? Also consider uncovered costs. The grant may not cover certain items that are important to your desired activities or goals. For example, the vast majority of federally funded grants cannot benefit an individual or an individual organization. This means that federal grants usually can't cover items like construction, building improvements, general purpose equipment purchases, donations to participants, and similar costs. If you want to apply for a federal grant that covers, for example, staff time and supplies for an educational program, are you able to cover the other costs associated with other sources of funding? Also consider indirect costs. Indirect costs are sometimes allowed by grants and sometimes not, and always to different levels. Indirect costs can typically be used to cover items like utilities, general office supplies, administrative staff time, insurance, maintenance, depreciation, etc. Any of those costs that are hard to exclusively attribute to one specific grant's activities. As I mentioned, these are usually limited, and the limit is often quite low, usually around 10% of grant costs. And indirect costs still cannot be used to cover unallowable activities, which usually include land and facility rental costs. If you seek the grant, are you able to cover these costs with other sources of funding if the grant does not cover them or does not fully cover them? Something else to consider. Taxes. Another thing to consider is the tax burden of a grant. Typically, federal grants are considered earned income and must be included in an organization's earned income for that year. Can your organization afford the tax burden that can come with a large grant? Also consider withholds for closeouts. Many grants withhold or keep back 10 or 20% of the total awarded amount until the end of the grant. This is a way to ensure that recipients complete all reporting and closeout requirements. Can your organization budget to cover those costs during the duration of the grant until that 10 or 20% is released after closeout? Again, these costs do not apply to every grant. We're just highlighting them now as points to consider prior to applying. Next slide, please. Most grants will release either a request for proposals, RFP, or a request for applications, RFA, when they are accepting applications. This is the best resource for applicants, and you should read it carefully. Usually, RFPs will have two parts, an overview of the program and application instructions. The overview will describe the grant and its ideal applicant. Reading this part should tell you the purpose of the grant, that is, what are the goals of the grant? Do they match your organization's goals? Eligible organization types, eligible costs and activities, due dates, grounds for disqualification, any criteria that would score extra points for an applicant or proposal, and any extra requirements of the grant. We recommend you read this part very carefully. It will tell you whether a grant is worth applying for your organization. Remember, applying for a grant that does not fit your organization and your goals is a waste of your time and your administrative budget. For example, if you work exclusively in growing, harvesting, and selling direct to consumer via CSAs, the Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Grant that I work on is not a good fit for your organization. If you read our RFP, it states that this program can only fund post-harvest, pre-consumer processing, aggregation, and distribution activities. So at that point, you can stop reading the RFP and start looking for a grant that is a better fit. On the other hand, if you are looking to purchase a potato washing equipment line, this program might be a great fit because that is a processing activity. So you should keep reading the RFP to see if you fit the other criteria. Pay extra attention to any extra requirements of the grant. For example, the grant may require you to attend conferences to share the results of your project with other similar organizations. Consider whether your organization has the capacity to meet these requirements and build the time and costs to do so into your proposal. Next slide, please.
The second part of the request for applications is usually detailed application instructions, though sometimes these can come instead with the application itself. Either way, we recommend reading them carefully and outlining your proposal first. What main points do you want to include in each section? You can read about the grant purpose and ideal applicant in the request for proposals. How are you going to showcase your organization and proposed activities in the best light? While you have points you want to make, be sure to answer the questions asked in the application to ensure the highest possible score for your proposal. Even the most wonderful text won't score very highly if it doesn't answer the questions asked in each section. Don't assume that the person reading your proposal has any familiarity with your organization, your community, or the issue you're trying to address, within reason. So it's good to provide background information on these points, examples of past success for your organization, and if possible, statistics or demographic information. For example, kids aren't eating enough vegetables might be true, but saying only 5% of children in our neighborhood located in Southwest Metropolis have daily access to fresh produce, and USDA has identified our community as a food desert is much more powerful. And remember, you can use these data points in more than one grant application. To that same point, try to avoid jargon that the reader may not know and write out all initialisms and acronyms the first time that they're used. When writing your responses, it's usually best to do so in a word processor like Microsoft Word or Google Docs so you can spell check, edit, and check word and character limits before copy and pasting the text into the application form. It's a good idea to proofread several times and ideally to have several people proofread your text. And again, review the RFP or RFA. Don't be afraid to borrow keywords or short phrases, again, within reason, from the RFP to show that your proposal is a good fit. Especially check if the funder has provided templates, sample responses, examples of successful past projects, scoring rubrics, etc. Next slide. The work plan and budget are common parts of a proposal. Work plans describe detailed descriptions of the activities to be done during a proposed project. These should include a timeline, usually broken down into months or quarters, where you describe the individual tasks that will be completed to meet your greater goals. So for example, if your goal is to develop an educational program in 1 year, you might spend the first 3 months planning the curriculum, 1 month testing it, 2 months doing outreach, and then provide 2 classes per week in the final 6 months. Or if your goal is to refurbish a processing center, you may first solicit bids, then choose a contractor, obtain permits, undertake the construction work, receive inspections, and finally begin using the updated facility. Work plans may request you to include the names or titles of who will complete or oversee each activity. And it's also a good idea to leave a month or 3 at the end of your grant for tracking and reporting on results, finalizing your project, performing any required outreach, etc. Budgets are also an important part of many proposals. Remember to break down your costs into reasonable units and justify all costs. Why is that line item needed for the project to be successful? It's important to do research to ensure your cost estimates are reasonable. Not only does this show care and consideration, leading to a higher score on your proposal, you may well be locked into those costs that you provide in your application. You might see the terms budget and budget narrative. And while these are similar, typically the budget refers to the numbers themselves, while the budget narrative refers to the written justification for each line item. How it will be used, is it necessary, are the costs reasonable, etc. Not every grant requires both, but many do.
All right, we highly recommend starting early on your grant proposals. Rushing to complete a grant proposal is rarely successful and always stressful. Starting early gives you time to research, to read the request for applications carefully, visit the funder's website for additional resources, find accurate costs for your budget, speak to partners who can provide letters of support, and more. Starting early gives you time to work and edit, to write carefully and thoroughly, to create detailed work plans and budgets, to collaborate within your own organization, to revisit thoughts and plans, to proofread, and to receive feedback from partners or technical assistance providers. Starting early gives you time to receive help, to read through frequently asked questions documents, submit questions to the funder, attend informational sessions, receive technical assistance from TA providers, etc. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, starting early gives you time to troubleshoot. Many grants require you to apply through a portal. You may have trouble registering, accessing your account, submitting your proposal, your internet could go down, anything else. If you are doing this well before the deadline, usually you can receive technical support to help you complete these tasks. Please don't wait until the final day to create your account or the final hour to submit your proposal. It is usually too late to access this help at that point. Every grant cycle, Logan and I have seen desperate emails from applicants who have spent days working on a proposal only to have their computer crash at the last minute or face other technical difficulties. Don't let that be you. Please apply early. On that note, what if you discover a grant that fits your organization, but the due date is tomorrow or even last month? In this case, keeping a grants calendar for your organization is a great idea. For example, if you discover a June deadline in July, skip ahead to April or March of next year and add that grant along with any relevant links, contact information, a brief description, whatever would be helpful to you, to your calendar. Then when March or April rolls around, you'll get a helpful reminder from your past self to apply for that grant with plenty of time to put together a solid proposal. Next slide. Speaking of help, how can you get it? We recommend you visit the funder's website to read frequently asked questions documents, learn how to participate in questions and answer sessions, read guidance documents, register to attend webinars or other informational sessions, view recordings of those webinars or informational sessions, and so on. I can say CDFA, every time we have a grant, we have multiple opportunities to attend these kind of informational gathering sessions. If that doesn't work, reach out via email with questions, but please be clear in your question. For example, if you email our email at grants@cdfa.ca.gov with the question, "Tell me about your grants," you will receive a boilerplate response with links to our databases. However, if you email instead, "I am interested in applying for XYZ grant and my specific question is blah, blah, blah," then we will be more able to provide you with an actual response. We also recommend you seek technical assistance. Your local farm bureau, the Southwest Regional Food Business Center, and organizations such as CAF can help you with proposals or point you in the direction of grants that might fit your organization.
What happens after you submit? First, be patient. Most grant officers want to help, but can be overwhelmed during the application periods. So please be patient when asking questions or for guidance. There is usually no need to follow up on a grant, as you will be informed when a decision is made. If the date in the RFP for receiving a response has passed, feel free to reach out via the provided email. But remember that month deadlines may mean any time in the month. So if it says you'll receive a response in May, that might mean May 31st. Save your proposal, any research documents that you gathered, the RFP, and the application instructions somewhere secure for future use. Make sure to add the grant's deadlines to your grants calendar for the next year. If you aren't selected, request feedback if available. You can use this feedback to help you improve your proposal for other grants or for future application cycles for the same grant. And finally, don't take it personally. Many grants are highly competitive and not every good application will be funded. Okay, so here is our contact information for those who may want to reach out after the presentation. And we'll now open up the floor for Q&A.
And if you want to submit a question in Spanish, también hablo español y puedo responderle en español. I think we will start by kind of reading aloud the questions that we received during the presentation as you go ahead and submit your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat. So the first question we received is, do you, Lauren or Logan, offer grant assistance for those of us working on grant proposals that are not funded by CDFA? And I responded, the program I work on, RFSI, Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Program, is in very close partnership with the Regional Food Business Center. We have their business builder grants are funded by the same source of funding as RFSI. And we will be working together with them to offer technical assistance workshops in the near future on various topics. They will be open to all, not only recipients of the RFSI. However, Logan and I are not able to offer one-on-one assistance for grants that are not funded and or administered by CDFA because we are not subject matter experts in every grant. But of course, if you reach out to grants@cdfa.ca.gov, we can offer you some technical assistance providers that we know do great work. Logan, do you want to get the next one?
The next question, someone asked about putting a small amount of personal land into production with all of the produce being donated to local food banks and shelters. I do not have an LLC or 501 nonprofit registration, and I'd prefer not to do that. I just want to donate. Can I qualify and apply for grants just as an individual who is not generating revenue or has some other form of legal entity? And as Lauren noted in the response, in this case, you would want to search for grants that are open to individuals and review the goals and requirements of the grant in the RFP or RFA for ones that do not require business activity. One thing I will note as well for this is that a lot of federal grants do not allow donations or giveaways with grant funds. So that's something to look out for and keep in mind. I know that the Specialty Crop Block Grant does not allow any grant funds to go towards donations or giveaways. That's going back to that federal code requirements. So make sure to look out for that, as well as if what the eligible entities are for grants. You may also consider partnering with an existing nonprofit or LLC, and then you would potentially be able to apply for grants that are not open to individuals, but are open to nonprofits or businesses. Then, Lauren, do you want to take the last question?
Sure. The question was, in the current political reality, are federal grants worth applying for? And I said that this is an answer that everyone will have to consider for themselves. If you have received a federal grant, your executed, that is fully signed grant agreement does function as a legally binding contract and offer a good amount of legal protection for recipients who have received those federal grants. I did also mention that please remember that many state grants are actually federal pass-through grants that is funded by the federal government, but awarded and administered by the state government. Those offer a certain level of security as well because you are a sub-recipient of the granted state government in that case. Of course, there is more uncertainty right now, and everyone kind of has to do their own math to figure out if that level of uncertainty would cause undue impact to your organization. And in that case, you may choose to hold off and apply next year. Yes, we can't answer for you, but I would consider those things. Logan, did you want to add anything to that one?
No, I think you covered it. I did want to, been a bit of chatter in the chat, so I wanted to go over that. Someone is saying it's really challenging waiting for the next round when it's uncertain if the grant will have another round or still be funded in the future, which makes it very tempting to rush and meet that deadline, which is a very understandable impulse, especially with the uncertainty of both federal and state funding. Lauren pointed out in the chat that try to be realistic. Can you apply to a grant if it's a few weeks away? Maybe, but tomorrow, probably not. And I will add, as someone who often reviews grants for administrative completion, it can be quite obvious sometimes when someone put in a very last minute application and missed questions or didn't read the RFP when things were very clear as not allowable or that they needed to include certain documents and they didn't. Sometimes it can be very clear of, oh, this person must have just found out about the grant and really rush to try to put in an application. So it is very tempting, but the likelihood that you'll put in a successful application that will be funded when you're rushing to do something in 48 hours, it's pretty unlikely. And then there's also a question or kind of comment, if a grant solicits review panels, if you are not applying that year, it can be helpful to join the panel to see firsthand how the selection and rating process works. So for a lot of the grants that I work on, and I think RFSI as well, we do have external reviewers who go through all of the grants. We're always looking for more volunteers, so it's both really helpful for us as CDFA, and it is a great way to see what reviewers are looking for. You're kind of on the back end of getting to see how are people thinking about the applications. If you are unfamiliar with an organization, it can be helpful perspective of, oh, this person didn't include this detail, or I don't understand this part of the application. And so that can be very helpful when you are then applying in the future to know kind of what reviewers might be looking for.
And outside of your own grant applications, it is a great opportunity to network because you are usually put on panels with people doing very similar work to you. And that's a great way to make connections in the agricultural community. Some other questions. Where can I locate the specialty crop block grant? Logan, where can someone find more information?
I was just about to type onto the Q&A. I will put a link to the CDFA website where there's information about the specialty crop block grant. It should be reopening in the late summer, early fall of next year. Again, with all of the uncertainty around federal funding, that's our best estimate. So I will put a link in the Q&A with that specific web page.
Are there any ongoing grant writing workshops or trainings for those that not only want to apply for grants, but become a proficient technical writer for grants? I am not aware of any. I would recommend, again, reaching out to your local farm bureau, reaching out to the Regional Food Business Center. I know they are in the process of launching or soon to launch their business builder grants. I know that CAF has some workshops on these as well. Yeah, I apologize that I don't know those particular workshops. Logan?
Yeah. If you've already signed a contract or grant, it appears that the federal government is actively canceling all kinds of what I thought would have been binding legal commitments. Do you have experience today with past awarded grants being canceled midstream? So unfortunately, Lauren and I don't have a ton more insight than any of you all into what's going on in the federal government. So far, none of our grants have been canceled. We have not heard any word that that will happen. However, it
We
is
are
ultimately
aware of a number of direct USDA funded by USDA directly to producers and processors that have been suspended, that people have been receiving delayed payments. We are not aware of any that have been canceled at this time. And that is may not feel like a significant difference, but it is a difference. It is fairly common with an administration change for payments to be suspended for a brief period of time as they review those. That is something that happened in the past also. It has been a different procedure this time around, of course. There is a process to end grants that is possible. However, we can't just say like your grant is over, you're on the hook for all that money. Typically speaking, what would happen is that you would receive notice that your grant was being canceled. You would have the opportunity to charge for allowable costs already included in your budget that had already been incurred, things you had already spent money on, and receive the reimbursements for those. You would have a notice period to wrap up your activities, things like that. So there is legal protection. I understand that these pauses are incredibly stressful. They're stressful for us too. I can tell you, my salary is fully federally funded. So maybe not exactly the same boat, but we're definitely in the same sea with you. Yes, I have not heard of any grants being canceled at this time. I have heard of some suspensions, but that is slightly different.
Yeah. I'll just add, for now, the federal courts have prohibited federal agencies from pausing or terminating payments unless authorized by the authorizing statute. So a little bit in uncharted waters, but at the very least, it is sort of being sorted out between the courts and the executive branch at this point. As Lauren mentioned, a lot of our salaries are funded by those federal funds, so we are also ultimately waiting to hear and see what happens just as much as you all are.
A lot of people asking about how do you become a reviewer? I would reach out to the individual grant that you are interested in being a reviewer for, and we will add you to that email list, and we will definitely email you because we are always looking for reviewers. So related question, what is a good starting point to look for current or upcoming grant programs? The CDFA grants are on the screen right now. That's that www.cdfa.ca.gov/grants website that lists all the CDFA funded and CDFA administered grant programs that are currently active. They're listed alphabetically. You can scroll down, kind of get a brief overview, click through to the individual programs websites and learn more about them there. As I mentioned, as Logan mentioned, we will also be sending out this presentation in the post-presentation email, so you can look for those links that we shared towards the beginning of the presentation as well, both the USDA grants database, the federal grants database, et cetera, if you're looking maybe slightly out of the realm of CDFA. So yeah, find a grant that seems interesting to you, look at their website, see their email, and you can usually sign up for their contact list, either to get information when the RFA is out or to become a reviewer, or both.
I see another question in the Q&A. Can you talk a little bit about whether in your respective programs or others you're familiar with, repeat applicants are likely to receive funds repeatedly for similar work over time? Just thinking that many orgs benefit from long-term funding, but many RFPs are only 1 to 2 years. Curious about how to navigate applications when needs may be similar over time, but it feels like there's often an incentive to do new and different programs. Yes, this is definitely a challenge, being on like the hamster wheel of applying and reapplying. The specialty crop block grant program specifically does have a question about program sustainability and also asks applicants if they have received previous funding and how their program differs from previously funded grants. So it can be a bit of a balancing act of trying to figure out how to demonstrate that you're not asking for duplicative funds to just do the same program. But at the same time, we do recognize that often a lot of nonprofits are doing similar work over time and need that to continue to be funded. So the project sustainability question for the specialty crop block grant specifically, this isn't true for all grants, but for that program specifically, it asks how your project either is going to become self-sustaining, so if it's going to not seek additional grant funds, or contribute long-term to the benefit of the specialty crop industry. And so often for a lot of projects that are doing kind of educational work or something similar, that project sustainability section might be less of, we're going to fund a venture and generate a profit, and more so be about we're developing an educational curriculum that will continue to be used. We'll have these sorts of resources or networks that will continue to have an impact. And then we don't, like I mentioned, we do ask on the application about those previous grants and if the applicant has been awarded for a similar project before. And often we see people not necessarily completely changing and doing a new and different program, but maybe they're just expanding. So before they focused on a specific project area and now they're going to a different part of the community, or they are building on previous work where they worked with just teens and now they want to work with teens and their families. They just worked with Spanish-speaking farmers. Now they want to work with Spanish and Hmong farmers. So it can really depend. But definitely this is a huge challenge, I think, for all nonprofits of trying to continually fund your work when everyone is looking for to fund a new or different program. Lauren, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, both of the programs that Logan and I work with are 2.5-year programs. So there are programs that are a little bit longer that you can look out for as well. And I would mention Ali and Moet, I apologize if that was wrong, put some good resources for the CAF funding database and the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, which offers periodic grant writing workshops for free, and grant admin workshops as well. And I know they're linked in our presentation, but I did want to give another shout out to the Regional Food Business Center and their upcoming Business Builder grants. Again, we will share, we got a request for links. We will share the presentation, which has links to multiple grant databases that you can filter, looking for ones that are available or possibly available. I do not know about this grant writing class. Ali put in that the Sierra Nevada Conservancy offers periodic grant writing workshops and grant admin workshops for free. Oh, I will put that information. It looks like that was sent only to the hosts and panelists. I will put it in the chat for everybody if Ali does not mind. There we go. And there is an email there that Ali shared. Sierra-Riker@carcd.org for more info on those workshops. And we will be emailing out our presentation with all of those links this afternoon. So keep an eye out for that. Any additional questions? Otherwise, I'm sure we can wrap up a little bit early. We're also prepared to answer your individual questions about your individual grant applications if you have any of those. Jennifer, I'm not sure what you're referring to about San Diegans don't qualify. If you could provide a little bit more. CDFA does not run this grant writing class, and I had not heard about it until Ali messaged us today. So I would email that email that Ali provided. The links will be sent out this afternoon in the follow-up email. Again, we don't know and we cannot endorse any particular grant writing workshops. That was just an email that Ali was kind enough to share. She sent it to us, so I sent it out. The Resource Conservation District in San Diego is very active and supportive, says Colin H. Richard. Folks, if you do want to share resources, if you see at the bottom of the chat, it says to, and you can click on there. And if you change it to everyone, you'll be able to share the information with everyone. So Colin Richards stated that the Resource Conservation District in San Diego is very active and supportive.
And if you registered with CAF, we should already have your emails and see that you signed up. So we'll be able to send out the slides and any other follow-up to everyone who registered for this panel. So we already have your contact information. You should be getting an email from us.
Yes, the email will be from CAF, actually, with our information. We will get those to CAF and they will get them to you. Many thanks to all for attending. Our emails are on the screen right now. So if you have questions later, those are Logan and my direct emails. You can email us at any time. If you're not applying for a grant that we work on, we'll be happy to give you some assistance. Otherwise, we'll point you to our official Q&A, FAQ, webinars, etc. And then, of course, grants@cdfa.ca.gov is our email. All right.
Good luck with all of your
Good luck, everyone.
applications.